Our last part of our IEP series is part number 4, talking about school supports and placements. Within the school supports and placements, we are going to spend some time talking about the least restrictive environment. Every child should be placed in their own least restrictive environment. And the absolute least restrictive environment is the general education classroom without supports. So no peer professional, no SECA, no one-to-one aid. It's important to note that having a one-to-one support in the general education classroom is actually more restrictive than being solo in a special education classroom. So this means having a one-to-one aid support adds a level of restrictiveness at each level of least restrictive environment. And this is why it can be so difficult for our kiddos to receive one-to-one supports in class. It's much common for them to have a shared peer professional. I've linked in here the CPS website for their least restrictive environment, where it goes into more explanations as to what the least restrictive environment is, what school code it is. But they have this nice visual that goes into the LRE continuum that they use, moving from the least restrictive environment all the way down into the most restrictive. So on the left side of it, it's talking about restrictions of environment. On the right side, you'll see an arrow that starts at the most and goes to the least. And that means that they spend the most time in the general education classroom up top versus the least amount of time down at the bottom for is the homebound and hospital. When you're determining the LRE, it's based on their students' individualized needs and not their disability category. So not all children with autism are automatically placed into a special education classroom, whereas, not all, maybe sometimes some of the, children with autism will be placed in some of the homebound and things like that. So it's not just based on your disability, it's mostly placed upon your child's individual needs. The IEP team looks at a lot of these different needs to help determine the most appropriate placement for them and the least restrictive setting in which they will benefit educationally. It cannot be based solely on your category of disability, your severity of that disability, any maladaptive behaviors that you engage in, your child engages in, I should say, their language and communication needs, needed modifications to the curriculum, configuration of the district service delivery system, or the availability of space and location of those educational services. The placement solely must be placed upon by the school's ability to implement the student's IEP, the school that is closest to the student's residence, and an available seat in a school that can provide the supports and services documented in the IEP. They must review it at the very least once a year during that IEP process. Usually it's the very last thing that's covered because you want to take all of the stuff that you've already talked about with regards to present level of performance, modifications, accommodations, goals and services, all of that funnels right into making a helpful decision as to the least restrictive environment. Your child's LRE is based on those services and supports outlined in that IEP, but you have questions or concerns, you can file a complaint, you can go through mediation, you can go through due process if need to dispute any LRE decisions. It also has some other links in here with regards to the procedural manual that I shared with you guys during the last presentation. Here is the LRE continuum again, starting at the least restrictive, going through the most, as well as the most time in the general education to the least time. I thought that CPS did a really good job of explaining the different levels of least restrictive environment that they have within the CPS school district. So it starts with your general education, then it goes to gen ed with support, supplemental support and services. It goes into your resource classroom that's usually in a separate classroom, into instruction in a separate class. So like your cluster placements, full special education classrooms, goes then into the separate day school. So this is your Easter seals, your helping hands, giant steps kind of placements. Residential school is where a child would live there and go to school at the same time, receiving 24-hour care. And then there's homebound or hospital for those who have more needs for more of a restrictive environment due to their supports and needs that they need. So I just went through all of the categories and placements. I will be covering a lot of these and what it generally looks like and the differences that you may expect. School assignment through CPS also has a FAQ doc to kind of help you to ask questions or understand, what is a school assignment? What does that mean? And how is it determined? What if I'm not sure I want my child to go there? Like what, do I have to do? And if there's a school that's closer, I believe that they can implement the IEP. Why is my child not going there? So it kind of goes through some of those questions as a parent that we would have about school placement and why a certain school is not going to be, that school for my child. Another thing to note within CPS, really honestly, within any school district, is that even though one school offers this support and service and this type of classroom placement, this school year does not mean that it will also have it for the next school year. Things may change, staffing may change, needs within the school may change. So even though they may have a cluster placement in your home school, if something should happen, that cluster classroom placement may not open the next year, and those kids need to go to a different school. Oftentimes, a lot of parents will ask for school recommendations. Where would you send a school like my child? Where would you think is the best placement for them? And honestly, sometimes it's not the school that makes the placement. It is your staff that is implementing the IEP and the administration that is assisting the staff in implementing the IEP that really makes or breaks that type of school placement with your child. So sometimes, if your child is in this cluster placement here and then it needs to move to a different school, it may not be, that school is not a best fit for them. Let's hope that those staff members will also, either go with them or the new school placement will have staff that will be running in a similar fashion with them. Paraprofessional support is another thing that a lot of our parents do request and ask for, and I wanted to give a brief explanation as to what that could look like, as well as to make sure everybody's under the understanding that it may not always occur, even if we feel that our child needs it. It is increasing the level of restrictiveness for your child, even if they're in a general education setting. So if a paraprofessional support was utilized with them, we always want to look at how are we fading out that support so that the child can be even more independent, but likewise also in a lesser restrictive environment. So paraprofessional support, such as in one-to-one aid or a SICA, as they're noted in CPS, can be challenging to obtain through CPS and also through some of our suburban school districts due to this level of restrictiveness. Many times this support is only provided to those who exhibit severe behaviors that may impede on the learning of others, as well as the safety of others within that classroom. And this support will not always be provided for those students who need prompting to initiate, to continue, to attend, or complete tasks or activities. So if your child engages in a lot of off-task behaviors, and requires somebody to come over and prompt them to return to work or answer a question or things like that, they may not be provided a paraprofessional to assist them with that level of need. But more than likely, if your child does exhibit some behaviors that are a safety concern or do impede in the learning of others, that may be recommended for them to receive a paraprofessional. At times, a shared paraprofessional support will be provided in the IEPs, especially to assist with, lunch duties, toileting needs, or other specific needs that are not across long periods of time. So quick transitions in the hallway, they might have a paraprofessional support, especially if their behaviors are not, complete elopement, but they are a safety concern because they may, walk over to another room or things like that. You want to make sure we have some support and eyes on them. So the first least restrictive environment is your general education placement. You would be placed in a general education placement without any supports, no notifications, etc., no services. It's what most parents think of as your typical or regular school placement is your general education classroom. And then there's the general education placement with supports and or modifications. This is the next level in which they'll be placed in that general education classroom setting, but they would also be receiving supports in the form of modifications, accommodations, and or paraprofessional assistance, such as one-on-one or a shared paraprofessional to assist with them accessing the general education curriculum. Again, thinking about this in terms of the continuum, it is more restrictive to be in this setting with an aide than it is to be in a special education classroom without an aide to help support them. And you could also have a combination of general education and special education placement. So they would join the general education classroom for certain activities or subject areas, such as your specials, which are art, music, gym, lunch, recess, or they may come in for certain subject areas like math, reading, science, social science, maybe a social emotional group, things of that nature within that general education classroom. In addition, they would be placed in a special education placement to receive support, individualized subject area content, etc., such as a resource classroom. We also have a self-contained special education placement. Cluster programs are designed for students requiring significantly modified curriculum with moderate to intensive supports in a separate classroom from gen ed peers for the majority of the day, usually between 61% and over for their day is spent in the special education placement. Individuals may also need assistance with adaptive skills, feeding, toileting, transition assistance, things of that nature. They're basically removed from the special or the general education setting and placed separately in a special education placement. In my presentation, I'm only going to show one of these links, but there is a map of the schools that this qualifies for in terms of cluster placements. It is broken down into, I'm just showing you the primary. There's another one for high school, as well as like moderate and severe. So this is moderate primary, moderate intermediate, moderate upper. It gives you the shading as to, what levels of classroom placement that they provide with regards to moderate services. And then there's another one that's more intensive in terms of what schools offer that. Some schools offer both the moderate and the intensive ES programs. And then you have what's called the therapeutic school placement. These are non-public special education programs that provide educational, therapeutic, and or residential services to students with disabilities. Students placed in a non-public school have such severe and possibly complicated educational and clinical needs that the IEP team has determined that no less restrictive setting on that continuum of alternative placements is appropriate within the home school district to meet their needs of the students. Non-public special education day programs are often referred to as separate day schools or therapeutic day schools. For example, there's Giant Steps, Helping Hands, Easter Seals, JCFS, Esperanza. There are a couple of school placements within CPS that are public special education programs that have more of that therapeutic school placement, such as Beard, that kind of similarly provides the same level of intense services that kids would need. Some of the kids that are within the Beard school placement may further go on to a non-public special education program, such as Easter Seals, should they need further assistance past the third grade, because Beard educational program ends at third grade. And then the next one is the residential care or treatment facility. This is one of the most restrictive settings where a student is within that residential facility. These are for most severe in terms of behavioral or educational needs and require a much more intensive setting to help make progress. They're receiving 24-hour round-the-clock care because they're also taking up residence at that placement. And they're not just going to school, they're also living there. Non-public setting, and this is a non-public setting, and it would be tuitioned out i.e. CPS would pay their tuition to attend the setting as they would for a therapeutic day school placement. And this may involve a student attending a school in a different state if a facility was not found within the state of Illinois. Both the residential care and treatment facility as well as the therapeutic day school placement are paid for through CPS as long as the IEP team has deemed it necessary that this is their least restrictive environment for their educational needs. And I move on to service delivery. And this is talking about services for speech, OT, PT, social work. And this can be delivered in the following ways. You can push in your services where you're pushing into the classroom and delivering your services within the classroom setting. It could look like pull out, where you're taking the child out of the classroom and into an individualized therapy room to work on your services one-on-one with that child. Services can also be delivered individually, where you're working one-on-one, or it could be within a small group. You have a small group of students who are working on similar goals, and you're working together during this group to provide those services. It could also be provided through consultation, and you need to specify who the consultation will be taking place between. So oftentimes you'll see OT consulting on an independent functioning classroom goal. The OT and the teacher will consult on this goal with regards to X for 15 minutes per month, or the speech team, the therapist will consult with the special education classroom teacher with regards to utilizing the communication device within the educational goals for 15 minutes per month, something of that nature. Consultation is pretty small in terms of the minutes per month. It's usually a check-in and things like that. The beauty of push-in services within the classroom is that teachers and others staff that are within the classroom can help to see what you're doing with the child, as well as ask questions in the moment of like, hey, the student's been doing this. How do I, where do I find that on a communication device and things like that? The downfall of that is you are within the classroom. There's more distractions and things like that, and it's not as individualized. But many service providers will provide services in multiple fashion ways. You may also hear them say direct versus indirect, and this is basically direct services to the student or indirect in terms of consultation with others. So may well be 60 minutes per week of direct services, group and individual, or 60 minutes per week, direct, group only. And then 15 minutes per month indirect means consultation with whoever they're consulting with, such as the classroom teacher. They do need to indicate how many minutes per week or how many minutes per month and how that service delivery will be provided, whether it's classroom or pull out. Another thing, again, just to remind parents that even though your child may be receiving 60 minutes per week of speech services through a private provider, does not always equal to or equate to receiving 60 minutes per week of that same provision in the school. The school is looking at how does the disability impact their ability to access curriculum and the school setting. So the goals are going to be directly related to that. Whereas the private provider is looking at medical necessity. Here are some forms for you guys to kind of look at and familiarize yourself through the Illinois State Board of Education. You don't have to familiarize yourself very much, but when you're, going into your first initial IEP, it is helpful to kind of go through and like look at and see, exactly what type of forms you're looking at. What does this all mean? How do I find things and stuff like that? So there's lots of, summary reports, documentation of evaluation results, the eligibility determination form. These are all forms that would be provided within the evaluation or the eligibility and the IEP meeting. What does it look like for accommodations and supports? What does it look like for educational services and placement? What does an annual goal look like? There's two options there. If your child does have autism, there is a section of the IEP called Autism Considerations that the school has to go through and determine what considerations must be made for each of the sections of the autism diagnosis, and how that autism impacts their ability to access general education curriculum and the school setting. So that one's specific to considerations for individuals who have been diagnosed with autism. Some of these, even though it may look like this for example, it may look like this in the ISB form, it may look a little bit different in each school district. These aren't the end all to be all with regards to how the forms are supposed to look like, but the school district must have certain indicators put into their own forms so that whether they use a service online that helps them to type everything out, all of the different sections that ISB has indicated as like, this is important, you have to have this in your IEP, must be included in their own individualized forms that they make. So even though they may look a little bit different than what the ISB form has, each of these forms are specific to meeting the needs of IDEA. And then Equip for Equality has put together an IEP presentation for how to read your student's IEP. So it goes through all of the different sections that I've kind of talked about with regards to the IEP process, all into one other document that you can read. It also goes through, which is nice, is that they take each of the forms from ISB and kind of indicates, where can you find this information? Well, disability is found at the top of this page. And then in this page here is where everybody's written in as to, the participants that were present. Eligibility review and IEP indicates, what part of the meeting they were present for and what information they provided, so that they can indicate who is present. Signing this participation page does not mean you agree with the IEP. So I want to make that very clear. Just because you sign this here does not mean that you're sharing your agreement or disagreement with the IEP. So it's just basically who is at your meeting for your child, as well as their role. And it just, goes through each of the sections so that you have an understanding of what each section kind of means. So it's a really nice how-to document to help you really fully understand an IEP with regards to that. If you have any questions or any concerns or anything, you can always reach me at natalie.deutsch@cptwc.com. Especially if you need assistance with initiating your evaluation and your IEP requests, or maybe you would love for somebody to review the IEP and just make sure that you're understanding it, as well as there's no blaring questions or concerns or red flags that we should be aware of as it is with regards to your child. You, as the parent, are the driver of the bus. You're the decision maker with regards to your child and their educational services. The team is there to help you, to guide you through the process and to understand what your child needs, but you are the determinant as to whether or not your child will receive that through your consent or your revoking of that consent. But you drive that bus. You're the person that knows your child the best and can help make those decisions for their best interests. So always know that you are your child's best advocate, but we are here to help you should you need anything with regards to this journey. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact me. Hope you have a good rest of your day.